All right. So I'm Elisa Hauser. I'm the senior philanthropy manager at Dr. Bronner's. Christina and I together curate and develop trainings for our nonprofit partners and the wider network around us. Since this training was developed in partnership with Maria Rio last fall, I have been really, really looking forward to this. So I'm going to introduce our speakers and then we'll get going. I don't know about you all, but I have been fangirling about Vule since his blog started as nonprofit. I think it was called Nonprofit with Balls over 12 years ago is when I found it. And Vu is a former executive director, a prolific speaker and writer, and he says the things that need to be said. And Vu has given us the words, the frameworks, and even the communities that allow us all to be more courageous as agents of justice inside of the soul-sucking crappiness that's the nonprofit industrial complex. He is behind projects like grantadvisor.org, where you can anonymously rate funders and foundations. If you didn't know, check it out. Community-centric fundraising, which I know many people on this call are involved in. And Vu has inspired other groups and movements that I've been part of and really happy that they exist. ED Happy Hour, Crappy Funding Practices, Show the Salary. There's probably so many more. Vu, thank you for saying yes to being here today with us. We're really honored to have you. All right. So, Maria, the first word that comes to mind to describe Maria for me is goddess. She is the CEO and founder of Further Together, a fundraising consulting firm that specializes in equity-driven and innovative approaches to resource generation. She helps nonprofits use community-centric fundraising practices to bring in exponentially more revenue. She hosts a podcast. She writes extensively on the topic of justice and fundraising. She has been our co-conspirator in developing and curating a truly awesome lineup of fundraising trainers for you all this year. Thank you so much, Maria, for being here and for making this happen. And off to you and Vu.
Thank you and Christina, and thank you for being such an amazing partner. Me and Vale, we came up with a list of topics, list of conversation like starters to have between the two of us. Right before all of you joined, we were talking a little bit about how are we feeling right now. It's rough times. Boo, how are you feeling?
Oh, hi everyone. Vu, I use him pronouns. I'm calling in from Seattle, which is on Duwamish land. Thank you, Alyssa and Christina and Maria, for having me here today. And thank you for starting with just checking in because I know everyone has been so stressed out about everything that's been going on. Just it feels like democracy is like falling and there's a rise in fascism. The ceasefire, which was never really honored by Israel, and now, is broken, and now the genocide continues in force, and it's just been really awful. So I feel like many people here, all of us, those who care about people, are really stressed out. I call it the personal integrity paradox, where if you are a good person, you're gonna feel like shit
No.
because you care about people. Right? So that's why many of us feel like shit right now. And so that's how I'm feeling crappy. And at the same time, I'm also inspired by everything that's been going on, all the protests that are out there, all the amazing people who are fighting every single day, who are just fighting and resisting and building community. So I think we need to hold both, like the hope and also just the stresses of everything and acknowledge them and rest where we can. So that's how I'm feeling. I don't know. I guess it's been like this unicorn sometimes, like its horn is broken. I don't know. That's how I'm feeling. I'm just all over the place. How are you, Maria?
It's hard because thankfully I'm in Canada, so it gives me a little bit of buffer with everything that's happening in the States, but just not that much from like everything. So it's so much of an attack on my identity, like my intersectional aspects of my identity, like being queer and being an immigrant, being Mexican and being a woman and all these things that it's just hard to feel safe. Although I've worked really for a long time to build that sense of safety for myself. But I think the small things that people do to resist and not obey in advance have been really inspiring to me. And then also, whenever I feel the most defeated, like I see people being vocal on LinkedIn and that kind of, okay, people are still in the fight. People are still like willing to create the space and not to just shy away from language and freeze their funding or be worried about lawsuits, which are all very real fears. But just, yeah, if it's a value, there's something there worth sacrificing to show that it's a value. So, yeah, a little bit jumbled as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I take a lot of strength from my colleagues, and I see some of them here. Hi, Maria. It's, there's some great people on this call. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today and just for letting us be a little bit jumbled and giving us grace. Maybe we're not going to be as articulate today with everything going on.
Yeah, it's nice to see some like people here who are also like thought leaders and doing their own really cool thing. But yeah, for our first question, we have what role do fundraisers play in helping fix inequity versus helping these broken systems pop along? I feel like I made that sound a little bit like they're not as healthy as they actually are, but what kind of role do you think fundraisers play when it comes to addressing inequity or helping continue it?
Yeah, first of all, I do want to acknowledge that I love fundraisers. I think fundraisers are amazing. I am a fundraiser, right? Even if some people don't think I am because I just rant about stuff. But I have been raising funds for nearly 2 decades now, or over 2 decades now. So I am a fundraiser. I know how difficult it is. I know the sting of asking for a gift. I remember sitting in front of a donor and saying, "Would you consider a gift of $10,000?" And she literally laughed, like she just burst out laughing. I remember being at this house party where I was just the dissonance of being at this place where the kitchen had this 180-degree view of the Puget Sound and was bigger than my entire apartment. And I was asking these very nice folks to help pitch in to help something that their ancestors probably caused in the first place, these problems. And I felt the dissonance so much. I think I hid behind one of those columns in their houses. I'm like, who has a column? I don't know which column it was, Corinthian or Ionic or whatever. One of those columns. And it's a lot. So the point is, I appreciate fundraisers. And at the same time, I think that we need to acknowledge that we have had some really terrible philosophies and practices. A lot of fundraising has been built on two main things. One is to try to get as much money for your own organization as possible. Screw everyone else, right? Don't worry about any other mission. Just get as much money for your own organization as possible. And that means you are a good fundraiser. And the other one is, in order to do that, you try to appease to donors' emotions and feelings. And who are donors? They're mostly wealthy white individuals, right? So you're appealing to rich, mostly white individuals. And by doing that, you don't think about like, where does wealth come from? What are the systemic inequities that led us to this space where so few people have so much money concentrated in their families in the first place to then get to dictate out to the rest of society which issues we should care about based on their whims and what tugs at their heartstrings, right? So the more that we keep doing this, the more we reinforce this horrible system, and we don't get our donors to think about like, where is wealth from? Where's their wealth from? A lot of wealth, and at least in the United States, is from like these five or seven main things, right? They are from slavery, stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, tax avoidance, imperialism, and colonialism. And we do not stop to acknowledge with our donors, hey, maybe instead of you giving a little bit of money and then we send you a handwritten thank you note telling you what a hero you are, you should return stolen indigenous land and make some reparation work and pay more taxes. We don't do enough of that. And by not doing that, we're perpetuating the very injustice that we're raising money to fight in the first place.
I like the comment on stolen land because through one of my podcast episodes, I talked to someone who's at Eco Justice Canada, and they had someone who was like, "Hey, we have this piece of land that we would love to donate to you." So you would then have that financial benefit, like you sell that piece of land. So they actually had a gift acceptance policy already aligned to this idea. Someone might give us a piece of land. I don't know how they already had that, but they did. And what they did is they went to different indigenous communities and they said, actually, this is probably not ours. If you want to take it, we'll just send it directly to you. So there's ways that fundraisers and organizations can really lead in this space, but I feel like sometimes they just see it as, yeah, move the money to the mission and that's good enough. But it's not always good enough. And I think fundraisers are actually really uniquely positioned to affect that change in their organization and externally, because internally we hold the purse strings. Other people don't know how to fundraise, especially if you're the only person. So you can actually say, I'm not comfortable doing a gala for this food bank. That dissonance is not aligned with my values. I wonder if there's other ways that you've seen fundraisers as uniquely positioned to affect that systemic change in their organization or more broadly.
Yeah. I feel like fundraisers, because of our relationships with donors, because of our skills, communications, and our ability to build rapport with people, that we actually are best positioned. Our jobs are to go out and talk to people and to be charming and to convince them to do stuff, to give money to our causes. But I think if we don't have this sort of stance of like we are agents of justice, that our job is not simply to get as much money into the organization so that other people at the organization can be agents of justice, the program folks, the policy people. Like for so long, that's what we think. We're like, oh, we're just gonna bring money and then we're gonna let the program people, deal with the equity and justice work. Like, or that's not our job. We're just bringing money. And I think so that requires quite a bit of shift, and I'm starting to see because of community centric fundraising, and there's people doing cool things. One of my colleagues, for example, a major donor, went to a workshop. I think it was a giving circle that had this sort of community centric framework. Maybe they didn't call it community centric, but like it was this framework, and they asked everyone, all the wealthy individuals in the circle, to examine where their wealth came from, where their family's wealth came from. And my colleague discovered that her family's wealth directly came from displacement of native families. That's how her ancestors got the farmlands that they used to build their wealth. And she decided that when she inherits this wealth from her grandparents, she's going to give 100% of it back to the native community. Right. Now, I think that's really inspiring. I went and I talked to her and I said, how do you feel about doing this? And she said, first of all, it doesn't matter how I feel, right? This is not about me. It's not about my feelings. This is just how it should be. We're talking about restoring justice. But if you're asking me as a friend, then I feel great. I feel like a burden has been lifted off of me. I feel free. If those fundraisers at Giving Circle who coordinated the Giving Circles did not have this lens of being agents of justice, they would not have helped my colleague reach this point where she could have this epiphany, right, and take actions on it. I think it's so rewarding to hear more stories like that. I think we play a significant role if we can embrace our roles here as agents of justice.
I love that story. I have a few similar to that where I've had conversations with donors. One time she was like, I didn't make my money through wealth extraction. Like my family digitized the first like thesaurus or something like that. I was like, cool. But you still kept the money. So it's still like wealth hoarding. So that was like an opportunity for education. And another one where like she's gonna inherit her family's wealth. So she's already like having conversations with her family, but closing the DAF down and just like distributing that money right away versus like in perpetuity. So yeah, those stories are really, really good. And just having that conversation can really change someone's mind about like how they do their taxes or something like that and really affect that change, even if it's one person at a time. And you can position them to educate each other too.
Yeah. Another thing that we can think about fundraisers' role is like helping to end this Hunger Games that we've been playing with one another, right? Where we just compete for resources. We don't think about, I don't know if everyone has watched the Hunger Games, the movies, or read the books. Like these kids are forced to fight to the death and is broadcast on live TV. And that's what we've been doing with one another. We've just been fighting for resources, trying to get, we use like all these tools. Like, what's the best way to reach donors? What's the best way to get us donors to donate to our organization? And we don't think about what is the role of our organization in the ecosystem. and how do we work more effectively together? Because the kids in the Hunger Games, like eventually, like they got together to bring down the Hunger Games. We should be doing. So I remember when in the beginning of the pandemic, when a bunch of organizations just got like $50,000 grants from one of the funders over here, just without without applying for it. It was unrestricted $50,000 grants. They just called up organizations and said, "Hey, we're just giving you money. We know that you're suffering." And you know what? That was really cool of these foundations to do that. What was even better was that several of these nonprofits turned down the funding. They said, "We really appreciate this, but we're doing okay. And some of our partner organizations are not doing as well. So we're gonna decline this funding. That's okay. Can you give it to these other organizations instead, these smaller organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities, and so on? Can you give this to them instead?" That is amazing. That takes this expansive thinking and this restoration of imagination about what our sector could be like. And I think that's one of the things that fundraisers could do is we can restore this sense of imagination to the sector, right? We've been so hunkered down in survival mode that I feel like we've lost our sense of imagination. We don't think about our visions anymore. We write our visions like, oh, we're going to build a better world. Poverty doesn't exist. And then we ignore that, right? To focus on our mission, which is we're going to provide these services. And what does it take to get to our vision? It's going to take all of us working together. And that means ending the Hunger Games.
There's this strat planning consultant that I know who's amazing. But what she says is think of your vision and then work backwards from there. Not just we need to survive the next 3 years. That's not really a vision.
Maybe you're thinking of Hildy Gottlieb from Creating the Future, because I like Hildy's philosophy of like thinking of what is the future we want and then working backwards. Because right now we're really enamored with incrementalism and specifically this 10% rule, which is this year we're going to have this budget. Next year is going to be 10% more. This year we're going to serve so many clients. Next year we're going to serve 10% more clients. And the next year, 10% more. Right? So we're serving 100 people this year. Next year, we're going to serve 110 people. And the following year, 122 people or whatever. Whereas Creating Futures framework is, okay, if we want to end the homelessness, then this year we're serving 100 people. But in 10 years, we might need to serve like 5,000 people or 0 people because there won't be any homelessness in the first place. What does that actually mean? It might mean we move from 100 people this year to 500 people to 8,000 people in 2 or 3 years. And we need to start thinking more ambitiously along those lines. And then creating advocacy work so that we can change policies and all of these problems and then go out of business and become a wedding singer. I don't know, or whatever it is that we dream about doing.
As an in-house fundraiser, I found a lot of resistance to doing things differently because there's like a lot of fear and self-preservation that kind of kicks in. Are there other reasons that you've seen people kind of feel resistance to community-centric fundraising or any equity working together with other nonprofits? And how can people work around that or work through it?
Yeah, that's always something we think about, right? I know in the comment sections, yeah, vision is great, but we need money to actually carry this work. And how do I actually do that? Yeah, there's some things that we do need to think about. Like we can't just be Pollyanna-ish about everything. We need money to do this work. And at the same time, I feel like we have a lot of assumptions that may not be true. Like I think a lot of our fears are based on false assumptions. For example, we fear that if we double down on stuff and we talk to our donors about racism and supporting Palestine, that they would leave and we would not have money to provide our services or whatever. But are those assumptions true? I remember in Seattle, one of my friends was leading this organization. And this was when George Floyd was murdered by the police, and there were all these protests, and there was a call to defund the police. And the organization decided that they were going to send out a message saying that they supported defunding the police, that they are supporting Black lives, and they knew. And they had some conversations among the staff where a lot of the staff were like, some of the staff, I could imagine some of the board members, I could imagine we're like, oh, if we do this, we're going to lose all of our money and funders and donors are going to run away from us and we won't be able to provide services. But the staff decided that they are going to align with their values. So they sent out this statement to all their funders and donors. And what happened was that, yeah, they lost some people. They lost a bunch of donors, but they gained 10 times more people. It's because they were aligned with their values. So this assumption that if we align with our values, it would scare our donors off so much that they would just run off is not always true. I've had conversations with donors where I've offended them, right? And yeah, some of them I never see again. But sometimes others would change their mind and then they would come back and invest like 5 times more based on the fact that I was, I don't know, courageous enough to tell them that they're assholes to their faces. I don't know. Of course, I have to acknowledge I have more privilege and stuff and a profile. So it's not always something that everyone can do all the time. But we do need to acknowledge like a lot of our fears and risks. Also, we talk about like the risk of doing stuff. We don't talk enough about the risk of what happens if we don't stand up for our values, especially right now. What happens if we don't? What if we don't fight for protesters who have been supporting Palestine and have been arrested or beaten because they made a documentary or whatever? Like, what happens when we do that? We let fascism win. So sometimes, like, we need to start thinking about the balance between like what we're willing to lose here and what we're willing to gain. I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Maria, on all this?
One of the ways that I've addressed resistance is by tying their hands with money. That has been helpful for me. So, like, talking to a funder who's very aligned and then, like, shaping the grants so, like, the organization has to become more equitable. It's a little bit more incrementalist, but yeah, the talking to donors has been super, super helpful as well. Just getting people thinking differently and just excited to innovate because our sector obviously hasn't done a lot of innovation and obviously doesn't work, right? Like it's only bringing money in through the door, out through the door, right? It's not addressing systemic issues on a large scale. So it's just too piecemeal to move forward in a meaningful way. And I think that a lot of donors understand that. And when you say, I call them an asshole to their face, I think that's totally fine too. I'm not saying, as some critics of community-centric fundraising, like it's not, we're not going to hurt the donor or anything like that on purpose. But it is about treating each other as partners in the work and being able to speak openly and be transparent with everything that's going on at the organization and have them be as accountable to the community as you are. Not just like, I get a receipt and bye, see you later, but also like, you need to understand these issues and be able to speak to them because I need you to be another ambassador of what I do. It can't just be me as the fundraiser selling you the idea of a better world, but not actually putting the tools in your hand for you to be able to do that yourself as well.
Yeah, I think we've been so beholden to this donor-centered pedagogy that we have been trained with, right? This training among many fundraisers, fundraising experts, who right now are mostly white, who for decades have told people this is how you raise money. You center the emotions and feelings of donors. You treat them like heroes. You use the word you at least 50 times in every appeal letter. You did this because of you. This happened because of you. Our community is stronger. It's a very egoistic sort of like ego stroking approach that I think has done a lot of damage. And I liken it to, I don't know, like husband centered marriages. Hey, like imagine like I've been a husband. I would love it if every single time I did the dishes or something, like my partner writes me a handwritten thank you note and is, dear Vu, you did it because you washed the dishes today. Our family is stronger. Our community is better because of you. The children and I are so thankful for your presence in our family. Please come to this exclusive wine and cheese events for amazing husbands like you. Yeah, I would love that. Okay. If I get a thank you note every single time I did what I should be doing already, I'd be more likely to do it. But is that really a strong partnership? I don't think strong partnership is when one person is expected to go around chasing and praising the other person and lying to them about what's been happening. It should be based on a shared vision and goals and honesty. In a strong marriage, yeah, you will argue with one another. You will be honest with one another what's going on, and you will do your part because you're in this thing together. Right? And we don't do that with our donors. Like they're not actually part of, like, we've been told not to treat them like ATM machines, but we have been. We're just really nice. We pat them on the heads. We write them handwritten thank you notes to our ATM machines. Right? We would tell them like, yeah, actually, let me tell you that what you said was racist, and here's why. Like we would have enough trust to actually let them hear things like that, you know? Or we would tell them like, right now, fascism is on the rise, and we just do not have time to write you handwritten thank you notes. Okay, so we're gonna pause that for the next several months while we will like, participate in protests. Why don't you join us in the protests that we're doing? That will be an actual partnership. That will be embracing our roles as agents of justice instead of just being like the personal shoppers for equity. I was writing this week's blog post that it has felt like our sector has become this giant sky mall catalog of causes competing for donors' attention. I remember those catalogs. Remember those on the plane? I don't know you. Yeah, but they were really cool catalogs. The Sky Mall catalog, all these amazing, cool stuff, and it just felt like that's what we have become. Just for donors to be like, "Oh, this really resonates with me. I'm gonna pick this item. I'm gonna buy this item." And we're like, "Oh yeah, you should totally do that. Here's another cause that you might want to consider." Versus telling them, "Look, here's what's been going on. We need your help on this. Can you participate in this? Can you cut out this shitty or this stuff right here that you're doing that's not helpful at all?"
Mm.
That's kind of what we need to be doing right now.
I think those conversations too give you a little bit of ammunition to use internally. Hey, my major donors hate galas. Like they don't like it. They think there's a dissonance. They're spending $300 on this ticket when our service users can't come. And that actually helped me bring it to the board. Our major donors don't like this. I don't like this. Our smaller donors don't like this. So why do you want it to happen so badly? It's very, as you were saying, like egocentric. I wanted to shift gears a little because I wanted to ask you this, and I'm almost out of time. So I did an episode with Liz Leclerc on my podcast, and there was like this aspect of accountability that she's been trying to do at a past organization where the donor was like sexually harassing her and being horrible. So she took it to the organization. She took it to the media. She did a lawsuit against, I think, the organization or the donor, maybe both of them. And still there was the kind of like lack of accountability of what people say versus what they do. And I know for a lot of like fundraisers and organizations, that can be really, really frustrating because outwardly we're saying like we support marginalized, underrepresented groups. But then we shy away from the words like white supremacy, capitalism, racism. So how do you bring people along, but also not center their whiteness and their privilege?
Yeah, first of all, Liz is really cool. We're buddies, Liz Leclerc, and she's doing just really incredible stuff around NDAs and yeah, and just it's amazing work. So I'm really grateful for folks like Liz and their work. This has always been the challenge of doing this work is that balance. Yeah, I think though, again, going back to what assumptions are we making? If we've been treating donors like they're fragile baby birds who are not able to have conversations that are honest. And that's not true. I think this sort of infantilizing of donors has been really bad for our sector. And I don't think it's fair to them either, right? If we're going to treat them as partners, if we're going to respect them, then we should be okay with bringing out some uncomfortable conversations, including holding them accountable to toxic behavior that they are doing, and holding our own organizations accountable to like being complicit in it. Thank you, Troy. So yeah, we allow this to happen in the pursuit of money. So in many ways, we're just perpetuating the inequity, right? What is it? Like no amount of money should be worth like your fundraiser's safety, right? So we need to be very clear on our values here as we work with donors, but also within our own organizations.
I have a very similar belief, like no amount of money should be worth like my values, my integrity. And I think as a fundraiser, like you have a lot of opportunities to, if this organization is not living up to their values, like you can go find one that might, you know, a different position. Like we're very privileged in that way, where our skill set is such in high demand. Is there Is there a time where you kind of like see an organization and think, nah, they don't get it. It's time to go. Or should I keep fighting from within?
I use the metaphor of a lot of the work that we do is like feeding the Brussels sprouts of equity to toddlers sometimes, and toddlers in power. I have kids, and trying to get them to eat vegetables can be very difficult. But science show that it takes 8 to 12 exposures before a kid develops a liking for a new food. And oftentimes we give up, or we feel really useless when we try something and it doesn't work out. So sometimes when you are delivering these messages, like it feels like you didn't do anything. But the reality is that you provided maybe the fourth or fifth serving of this messaging. And that is needed among 8 messages that they need to hear in order to change. What you're doing is not futile. You may not see the results of it though. So that's one thing to remember, right? As you feel terrible and demoralized that what you're trying to do doesn't always lead to change immediately, is that sometimes change takes a long time and you may need different strategies, including maybe getting someone from outside the organization to come in and deliver the message. This is why I don't speak in Seattle, because no one listens to me. Like in Seattle, it's like, oh, it's Vu. I saw him at Costco. No one listens to you if you're from that organization or even from that city sometimes. So you have to think about different tactics. But yeah, sometimes you're exhausted and you tried everything and it may be time to leave. And that's okay too, because maybe your energy can be spent at a different organization that is more receptive and that has had 8 servings of Brussels sprouts. And now they're ready for that final serving where that will trigger them to change. So we need to be okay with leaving as well, and not feeling like we're indispensable all the time.
Okay, so they've had their Brussels sprouts, right? They're full. They're doing the work. They get it. Now, what if this global thing happens? Like, for example, the genocide. Does this organization speak up regardless of their cause, or do they not? I'm sure I
I
could
think
keep
there's
talking about mission drift forever, but just wondering shortly.
Yeah, I appreciate this. For so long, the concept of mission drift has such a hold on our sector, and I think is actually really toxic to our sector, because it's allowed us to entrench into these silos where people are like, I'm just going to focus on early learning. I'm not going to focus on voter registration. I'm not going to focus on political stuff. And that has allowed some horrific things to happen politically. All these systems keep working around us as we entrench within these silos. Like, I think we need to get out of that mindset. It should be every single organization's responsibility to work on voter engagement. There's certain things that affect all of us that we all need to be engaged in. And I do believe that, like, Palestine and the genocide committed by Israel, for not just since October 7th, but like for the last 75 or so years here, funded by our governments, right? By our tax money, that affects all of us, right? That affects all of us in the sector. If we're able to just allow that to happen, and if we allow protesters to get jailed and punished or deported because they're speaking up against, then that can happen to all of us. So from our own self-preservation of our own organization, then yeah, we need to start thinking about what are these issues that affect all of us. But from an intrinsic point of view, then yeah, we need to be speaking up on this, because intrinsically it's the right thing to do, to speak up against genocide. No matter where it happens, we should be speaking up against genocide. So this is our sector. This is like our moral compass here. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of our leaderships in the sector has failed this very basic test of humanity, of what is our sector, what is the point of our sector, if it's not to fight for justice. So this is when we're tested and we need to rise to the occasion here.
I think I'm in agreement, and everyone on the call must definitely be in agreement as well. There's a lot of really hard things happening. I'm sure you've also heard this from people you work with, like getting trained on what to do if ICE comes into your office, or having conversations around, are you going to have no funding next year? There's a lot of things really moving fast, especially in the States. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you've seen maybe organizations do to positively navigate those challenges, because you have the threat of lawsuits and the threat of funding cuts and X, Y, and Z. So maybe some inspo would be nice.
Yeah, well, we have organizations fighting back. Over here, we have the National Council of Nonprofits, for example, that have filed lawsuits and have been successful in stopping the federal government from freezing federal funding and so on. So there are amazing organizations that are out there doing that. There are funders that have been funding like the litigation work, but also legal defense funds for activists. There have been people doing, I don't know, even before this, there's been there's some really great stuff that maybe have not been in the media so much. Like Bloomberg Philanthropy, I think, started paying off people who were formerly incarcerated. If you were formerly incarcerated in Florida, you can't vote until you pay off your sort of fees to get back into voting, which I think is unconstitutional and horrific and ridiculous. But some of the Bloomberg just paid off their fee so that all these formerly incarcerated individuals could vote again. So there are people and organizations that are doing incredible stuff. I think the Woods Fund in Chicago has increased their payout rate from like 5% to 14% or so, which which is 5 times more than what people have been doing over here. I know there are funders who have been out there paying for bail funds for protesters who get arrested. I know Alyssa's organization has been like funding incredible work around Palestine. There's amazing things that are happening every single day. So I don't want us to lose hope here because there are good people, good organizations, good funders who are doing incredible work every day.
I do want to leave some time for Q&A. My final thoughts are basically, we don't need you to be fearless. We need you to show up. What about you, Boo?
My final thoughts, there's plenty. One is, first of all, I appreciate everyone, right? And second of all, I feel like just a few weeks ago, I was talking about this is the year of the snake, and the snake has always been the symbol of evil, right? The cunningness and evilness and sliminess, tricking people into eating forbidden fruit and stuff like that. But it's also been a symbol of rebirth because the snake sheds its skin. And I think in some ways, this is kind of what we're seeing is this the skin of society, the skin of patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy and all these negative things are finally being, but it is a very painful process. But in the end, I think eventually we will see a better world that comes out of this if we don't give up and we continue through, hold on to hope and imagination and take care of yourself during this extremely painful period in time. Because I think something better is coming.
Okay. I'm sure you all have a lot of thoughts on what we just talked about. And I'm sure there's things in your world that are very frustrating at this time, to say the lightest, versus could be also very, very scary. So we wanted to make some space for questions. If anyone had any thoughts, comments while you have Boo and myself here, we'd love to hear them.
Did you want us to ask them in voice? Okay, I tossed a question in the chat, but I will repeat it here, which is you were talking about the need for all organizations to fight for and speak up for things that are definitely wrong. And I'm wondering if there's a difference between speaking up and being supportive and mission creep, though, because it feels in my practice as a nonprofit consultant, mostly doing grant work, I often have to counsel my clients, look, don't do everything. You can't do everything well. Isn't it better maybe to channel the inquiry and the support for that cause to the people who are focused on that instead of trying to do it yourself and failing? Like, where's the line between being supportive and actually drawing money away from instead of networking together? Like, how do we, I feel like that's a really difficult place to navigate. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Ali, for that. Yeah, a lot of these things, it's easy for us to, in a very short webinar, throw some generalities out there. But the reality is that every situation will be different. What I think we're trying to get to is, yeah, no, you can't speak up on every single thing. Like if you're an early learning program, you can't just be involved in housing and homelessness and everything that you can. But I think there are certain things that reach a point where it becomes part of the culture, and in which case it tests us. Black Lives Matter, the violence against Black people committed by the police here is one of those times where we do need to speak up. The genocide of Palestinians is another time. We don't necessarily always have to dive directly into doing everything when there are, like you said, other organizations that are doing amazing work, like channeling Palestinian organizations and leaders and movements would be a way better thing than to take the limelight away from those other organizations. So we do have to assess like, what is it? But oftentimes what we have seen is that staff, for example, at organizations are saying, look, everyone is asking us to speak up on this topic because it's very important to our communities and our clients. And then boards and senior leadership saying, no, we're not going to do that because it's mission creep. In which case, that is not mission creep. Then mission creep is weaponized to not be involved in something that is considered controversial when it is a moral stance people should be taking.
So maybe it's a difference between being willing to have the moral courage to say the thing that needs to be said and not trying to expend your resources to do the thing that is not in your lane. Like channel the limelight and the stuff to the other organization, network if you want to do something together, but always be willing to have the courage to say the thing that needs to be said.
Or the courage to at least have the honest conversations around it. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's great. Thank you.
Chantal, did you want to add something or you wanted to ask a question?
Ask a question. Thank you, Maria. Hey, Boo. So I'm part of the community-centric fundraising San Diego chapter, and and I see some of my colleagues here, so shout out to San Diego folks. We are planning a community town hall in response to all the executive orders where we plan to unify, because I think we're experiencing a lot of the siloing that we continue to, of course, experience in the sector. But especially now, right? People are really uncertain and scared of how to respond. And so we're inviting government representatives at the local level, our foundation funding community, and of course, community member and organizations to gather and talk about this is real. We're all losing. We need to unite and we need to figure out how we're going to do this at a regional level. I don't know if either of you, anyone here has seen like unifying messages for that type of call. We know we need financial assistance and we need better policy at a local level as we're dealing with all the federal bullshit that we're dealing with. And so just wanted to pose that as a question to also help prepare us for the conversation and the type of commitments we're looking for at the regional level.
Hi, Chantal. It's good to see you here. Chantal and I hung out with the San Diego CCF folks a few weeks ago. That was fun. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much experience with town halls or engaging with folks, but I would say one is I think it's great that these sort of collective actions are really important and really effective. Like I know like in Seattle, for example, like 180 EDs got together to sign this open letter to funders saying give out more money in general operating funds and et cetera. What I would say is keep being at it and also to ask and to be ambitious in the ask. I don't think that we think enough about this sort of restoring imagination part of it. Like we don't ask enough because we've always been trained to think that this is other people's money and we should be thankful. And we have assumptions like government is bureaucratic, so we should be thankful when every single time they can trickle out a little bit of money or whatever. And I think we need, just like with everything being on fire, like we just do not have time to play some of these games anymore. And we just need to like really focus. Yeah. And yeah, so thinking big is when the 180 EDs got together over here in Seattle, like the first thing someone brought up was like, maybe we can start thinking about a small grant of like $100,000 that we need. And after conversation, we're like, no, we actually need them all to double the amount of money they're giving out. So they're giving out $5 million this year. They need to give out like $10 million. That's vision that we need to start thinking about versus thinking very like, what is that we need? Because we've been trained to think small.
And Chantal, there's some comments in the chat too that people want to get involved and help out.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out. Thanks, Maria.
Well, go ahead.
Thanks, Maria Rio. Thanks for the session. I'm asking this question because I want to sharpen my own argument and my own thinking around this. We talked a lot about mission creep and nonprofits using that argument to not engage in this moment. And I definitely work for an organization which we're doubling down on certain principles and using that as our argument to not go deeper in the work that needs to be done. And if I think about the parallel, like nobody's saying the corporate sector needs to get together and stand up. There's no corporate sector where it's cohesive, but we're expecting something different from the nonprofit sector. We're expecting the folks who work in what is a very broad sector that spans the entire political spectrum, right, to come together and do a thing. And when I tried to make that argument in my own life with people in the sector, nobody wants to hear this is like a moral thing. This is a moral thing we need to do. That's not an effective argument in the context that we're still in a capitalist system. The nonprofits are functioning in capitalism, and just like your ethics is not what's going to convince someone to behave differently. So I'm just curious if you have ideas on what's that really sharp argument for why nonprofits right now like need to behave differently from how they have, and they need to stand apart from how the rest of society is reacting to this moment. And that's a really hard question, but I'm just trying to get to those ideas myself so I can make those arguments more clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Chita. I think this will require a second webinar to discuss your very profound question. I do appreciate what you brought up, which is, yeah, the corporate sector is not expected to do this. We have a whole bunch of stuff expected of nonprofits that we don't expect corporate mergers, for example. We don't expect all the cafes in the city to merge into one giant cafe, and yet that's how we expect nonprofits to do. Like it's pretty ridiculous. I'm not necessarily sure like how people move is a science that people have been studying. Like why do people change? And oftentimes yelling at them doesn't really change them. Telling them that they're being unethical doesn't really change them. Sometimes it does take a little bit of, well, a combination of tactics, including like really listening to like why they're so resistant in the first place. And a lot of it is like from their own backgrounds and upbringing, childhood experiences and trainings and all this stuff that's unconscious even. So we got to start thinking about Robert Gass's social transformation project has this sort of like wheel of change philosophy where there's a hearts and mind, there's the behavior, and then the systems. We tend to work on towards the system, the behaviors, and we ignore the hearts and minds work, which is really necessary to change people, right? So that's one thing we need to start thinking about. But the other thing is sometimes we don't have time to change people's hearts and minds, in which case we might have to do other things such as public shaming and policy work, legal work. That's why like I launched crappy funding practices, because so many funders don't change because you ask nicely and provide all the data and white papers, is because they may just need to be publicly shamed. So that's a very short answer that is difficult and doesn't completely address what you're saying. And then we have Anthony, yeah. And then maybe that might be it.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you spoke to this already, but just wanting to get more clarity on how we can give more donors, more people in positions of power, these servings of Brussels sprouts.
I'm sorry, Anthony. Can you repeat that real quick? You cut out here because of my Wi-Fi.
Sorry, asking how are we building more opportunities? What opportunities can we find to give folks more of these Brussels sprout servings?
Yeah, some of it is just like the Brussels sprouts servings could be, here's an article, or we're saying this, or we bring it up to a staff meeting, we bring it to a board meeting, or you can get like a colleague to pretend to be a consultant and come to the board meeting to deliver the same message. Okay, there's no law that says that I can't just invite Chantel to come over and pretend to be a pro bono consultant, or maybe Chantel is a consultant. I don't know. We got to figure out how to do this more creatively here sometimes. Yeah, but sometimes it's just like an opportunity with donors, for example. I feel like we haven't really had many conversations with them. We don't invite them to opportunities. Over here in Seattle, an organization invited sent Ijeoma Uluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, to their major donors, right? And the major donors were like, what the heck is this? And they were like, yeah, we decided to send you this because we're reading this. The staff and we're reading this, and we would love for you to be involved. So here's your copy, and you can come, if you're free, come to this book discussion. And several of the donors, this is amazing. No one's invited us to have this conversation. So we got to think about, have we actually been feeding any Brussels sprout savings to anyone in any meaningful way?
I'm going to hand it over to Christina just so she can. We're already a little late, so sorry, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for all your questions. We will be sending out the recording for this call, the session evaluation, and don't miss our next training with Maria on April 10th. You'll be hearing from me via email. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maria and Vu. This was amazing. We all needed this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For now. Thanks so much, Boo.
Thank you.